The person who chose to create distance from you, the one who stepped back because the connection between you felt too intense and too difficult to understand, is now entering a quiet but deeply uncomfortable stage of awareness. There are rare connections in life that never arrive with noise, drama, or public announcements. They do not demand attention. They do not ask to be noticed. They simply appear in the background of everyday life, moving beneath ordinary thoughts until they slowly begin to reshape the inner world. Before either person fully understands what is happening, something inside has already changed. The emotional direction has already shifted. A lasting impression has already been left. This is the kind of bond people naturally resist, not because it lacks meaning, but because it carries a weight that feels too powerful to manage, too deep to ignore, and too real to control. For a long time, this person convinced themselves that walking away from you was the only sensible choice. They told themselves it was logic. They told themselves it was maturity. They told themselves it was protection. They repeated the same explanations over and over, building a story around their decision so it would feel steady and justified. Distance became in their mind the answer. A way to protect their routine, a way to protect the identity they had carefully built, a way to keep everything familiar exactly where it was. But there was one truth they never fully understood. Stay with this because the next part explains everything. Distance does not weaken a genuine connection. It strengthens it. It sharpens it. It pushes it even deeper. Every step away did not reduce what they felt. It made those feelings grow. Every attempt to forget became another reminder. Every effort to move forward created another layer of awareness. And now something inside them has changed in a way they never expected. Quiet, heavy, impossible to ignore. A realization that continues to grow no matter how hard they try to silence it. Let this be understood clearly. They did not step away because you meant nothing. That belief is simply not true. It completely misses what was really happening beneath the surface. People do not usually walk away from something that has no value. They walk away from what feels too powerful to handle. They step back from what begins to challenge the structure of their life. They retreat from what starts changing them from the inside. This connection was never ordinary. It was never simple. It was never something that could fit neatly into a familiar category. It did not follow rules. It did not wait for the perfect moment. It did not ask for permission. It simply existed. And anything that exists outside a person's control can feel overwhelming, especially for someone who depends on control to feel secure. That is where the struggle begins. That is where the conflict quietly grows. That is where resistance slowly takes shape. Now they are facing the very thing they spent so much energy trying to avoid. The silence they created is no longer empty. It is filled with reflection, filled with memories, filled with unanswered emotions, filled with thoughts of you. Inside that silence, something impossible to deny has started rising to the surface. They see you differently now, not as someone who briefly crossed their path, not as a passing chapter, but as someone who left a lasting mark on their emotional world. Someone who quietly changed the way they think, feel, and respond to life. What they feel is no longer uncertain. It is strong. It is raw. It keeps returning. It appears even when they try to distract themselves, even when they focus on other responsibilities, even when they convince themselves they have moved on. Yet the conflict remains, a battle between truth and fear, between recognition and control, between what their heart continues to feel and what their mind insists it should feel. Keep watching because this inner conflict only becomes more powerful from here. This kind of connection refuses to stay hidden. It refuses to remain silent. It keeps finding its way back through thoughts they never invited, memories they never expected, and emotions they still cannot fully explain. The more they push it away, the more clearly it reveals itself. You are not someone who can simply disappear from memory. You are not someone who fades with time or becomes unimportant because of distance. You remain. You stay present. You continue to echo through their thoughts. That echo slowly becomes part of their inner world. This connection never matched the plans they had for their future. It never fit comfortably into their expectations or responsibilities. Every effort they made to organize it into something simple failed. Every attempt to explain it away failed. Every attempt to convince themselves it was insignificant failed. Instead of becoming smaller, it continued to grow. Instead of becoming weaker, it became stronger. Instead of fading away, it settled even deeper. The more they resisted, the more aware they became of your presence in unexpected places, in quiet thoughts, in emotional reactions, in long moments of silence, in the spaces between ordinary days. Even the smallest moments became unforgettable. A glance that lasted only a second longer than expected. A smile that remained in memory long after it happened. A voice carrying a warmth they could not forget. These tiny pieces slowly gathered together until they formed something much larger inside them. That is when the inner shift became impossible to ignore. They started feeling exposed whenever you were around. Not because you demanded anything from them, not because you forced them to change, but because your honesty quietly reflected something within them they had spent years avoiding. Something genuine, something vulnerable, something deeply real. That feeling of being emotionally seen became uncomfortable, not because it was harmful, but because it uncovered truths they were not prepared to face. And once something real is uncovered, hiding it again becomes almost impossible. So they made a choice. They stepped back. They created distance. They pulled away. Not because there was nothing between you, not because they felt nothing, not because they stopped caring, but because the emotional intensity became greater than what they were ready to handle. They called it logic. They called it timing. They called it responsibility. They called it practicality. But beneath every explanation was something much simpler. Fear. Fear of emotional depth they could not control. Fear of a connection unlike anything they had experienced before. Fear of changes that might reshape the life they had carefully built. So distance became their shield, their method of protecting themselves, their attempt to regain control over something that no longer felt controllable. But control becomes an illusion whenever emotions are genuine. And now the deeper truth begins to reveal itself. The more they tried to escape, the more aware they became. The more they resisted, the more intensely they felt. The more distance they created, the more present you became inside their thoughts. Small memories return without warning, a simple conversation, a quiet moment, a feeling that appears without permission, a thought arriving during silence, a presence that refuses to disappear. It lingers, it repeats itself, it continues to grow. Even now, without fully realizing it, this connection remains quietly active beneath everything they do. It does not fade away, it does not break apart, it does not disappear under pressure. It remains steady, it remains strong, it remains unchanged. And sooner or later, when resistance finally begins to weaken, recognition becomes impossible to avoid. Watch until the end, because this final truth changes the entire picture. You were never forgotten. You were never truly replaceable. Some connections leave a mark that time cannot erase, distance cannot weaken, and silence cannot remove. No matter how far someone walks, certain bonds continue to exist beneath the surface, waiting patiently until the truth becomes too clear to deny. You are not temporary. You are someone who changed their inner world in a way they cannot undo. That realization becomes louder in silence than every argument they once used to push it away. Because some connections do not end through distance, they grow through it. They deepen through it. They survive through it. And they wait quietly until awareness finally catches up with the truth. What follows is a steady state of fascination, quiet longing, and deep inner unrest. The bond is never spoken aloud, yet it remains impossible to deny. It lingers inside silence, and within that silence it becomes even stronger. It grows sharper because it was pushed away for so long. They honestly believed distance would weaken the pull. They believed space would restore balance, bring back control, and slowly erase the intensity that had quietly settled into their life. They assumed separation would reset everything. They believed physical distance would end emotional influence. They thought stepping away would return order to a life that once felt carefully planned and predictable. For a while, they even believed their own reasoning. But stay with this, because what happened next changed everything. The truth slowly began to reveal itself in ways they never expected. Days continued, weeks passed, maybe even months slipped by. Life carried on with its familiar routine. Responsibilities were handled, daily tasks were completed, conversations with other people sounded normal. From the outside, nothing seemed different. Everything looked stable, everything appeared untouched. Yet beneath that calm surface, another reality was quietly unfolding. The connection never disappeared. It never lost its strength. It remained alive in the quiet spaces between distractions. It appeared during unexpected pauses, in ordinary moments, in hours that were never meant to hold meaning, but suddenly did. Thoughts they never planned to revisit returned again. Memories they believed had faded quietly rose back to the surface. No matter how hard they tried to suppress them, their mind continued finding its way back to you, again and again. What unsettles them now is not only that the feeling survived, it is the deeper realization that it never truly left. It had always been there beneath routines, hidden under responsibilities, buried beneath carefully built explanations. Layer after layer of reasoning covered something that remained alive underneath. Now those explanations are beginning to lose their strength. The certainty they once depended on no longer feels solid. The answers they trusted are beginning to crack. In their place grows something quieter but far more powerful, a growing awareness that what they experienced with you was never ordinary. Keep watching, because this realization only becomes stronger from here. It was never just attraction. It was never a passing emotional moment. It became something that left a lasting impression, and that changes everything. Once a person realizes they have been changed at a deep level, pretending becomes much harder. Denial starts losing its foundation. Distance no longer carries the same meaning. The emotional walls that once felt so strong begin to loosen, piece by piece. What once felt like strength now feels fragile. What once looked like control now feels uncertain. What once seemed like safety now feels heavy to carry. This is where they stand today, right at the edge of an understanding they tried so hard to avoid. Between resistance and recognition, between the comfort of denial and the quiet pull of truth. Part of them still reaches for control. Part of them still wants to avoid fully accepting what is real. Acceptance feels frightening because it would change everything they believed about themselves. Yet another part inside them has grown tired. Tired of resisting, tired of pretending, tired of pushing away something that refuses to disappear. That quieter part now understands something with growing clarity. No distance erased what was felt. No amount of time removed what was experienced. No logical explanation fully captured the impact you left behind. Because some connections are never measured by conversations or physical closeness. They are measured by the imprint they leave, by the depth they create, by the lasting way they transform a person's inner world. Those are the connections that remain. Those are the connections that continue echoing long after everything else has moved on. Those are the connections that wait patiently until they are finally acknowledged. Whether they admit it today or much later, awareness continues rising beneath everything else. It keeps moving forward. It keeps asking to be seen. And with every passing day, avoidance becomes harder to maintain. You remain present inside their inner world, Not because they planned it, not because they wanted it, but because certain experiences reshape perception so deeply that returning to the person they once were no longer feels possible. That realization continues unfolding inside them, stronger, clearer, harder to ignore. Every time they try pushing it away, it returns with even greater force, as though the truth itself refuses to remain silent. Then something unexpected begins to happen, something completely outside their control. The more they tried creating separation, the more clearly you appeared inside their thoughts. Memories arrived without warning, conversations replayed in scattered pieces, emotions returned in quiet waves they never invited. Even during moments meant for peace, your presence remained. Calm, steady, unmoved, like a shadow that never truly leaves, only waits. Stay until the end, because this next realization explains why nothing they tried truly worked. Songs they once ignored suddenly carry reminders of you. Ordinary moments begin holding unexpected meaning. Silence becomes louder than noise, because your memory continues speaking where words no longer exist. Slowly, the strategy of avoidance begins to fail. First, little by little, then all at once, then completely. Inside that failure, something new quietly begins to grow. Not one dramatic realization, not one emotional breakthrough, but a slow unfolding that reaches much deeper than logic ever could. They begin understanding this was never only about losing you, it was also about losing a part of themselves. Every attempt to create distance pulled them further away from their own emotional truth. Every effort to suppress what they felt created greater separation inside themselves than relief outside. Only now is that becoming visible. It does not arrive in one single moment. It builds through small pieces, through long pauses, through quiet discomfort that cannot be fully explained. It appears during ordinary days that somehow feel incomplete. It appears in evenings that seem longer than they should. It appears in thoughts that return without permission. Slowly, difficult questions begin forming inside them. Why does life no longer feel fully complete? Why does your presence continue returning to their awareness? Why does everything seem quieter, flatter, less alive than before? These questions refuse to disappear. They remain. They grow stronger. They demand honest answers. And inside those questions, the deeper truth finally begins revealing itself. They were never simply distracted by you. They were awakened by you. You were never just another passing experience or temporary emotion. You became a reflection, a mirror, a place where something inside them felt more alive, more honest, more awake than it had in years. Looking into that reflection, something inside them quietly began changing. Walls they had built over time slowly lost their strength. Defenses they trusted started falling apart without force, without conflict, without warning. Now they see it much more clearly. Walking away was never only about leaving you behind. It was also about leaving behind a part of themselves, a version that felt open, a version that felt genuine, a version capable of experiencing connection without fear. That missing part has now become impossible to ignore because the reflection still remains. It never fades. It never disappears. It only grows stronger the more they resist it. The realization arrives like distant sunlight breaking through a long night. Soft at first, then impossible to avoid, then overwhelming in its clarity. With that clarity, consequences quietly begin appearing. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but steadily. The distance they created was never true protection. It was only delay. It was postponement. It was an illusion of safety that could never keep the truth hidden forever. It simply stretched the time before awareness finally arrived. That moment has now fully arrived. The space they placed between themselves and you never removed what existed. It never erased the connection. It only delayed the unavoidable meeting with what had always been true beneath the surface. The truth waited patiently, quietly, without disappearing. They now understand something they fought against for so long. Avoidance was never safety. Avoidance was never real strength. Avoidance was simply delay. A delay in awareness. A delay in waking up to something already alive inside them. That awakening carries weight. It carries humility. It brings a deep inner change that cannot be reversed. Inside this quiet and undeniable awareness, another truth becomes impossible to ignore. You were never a threat. You were never someone they truly needed to fear. You were never someone who deserved to be pushed away. Instead, you became a reflection, a mirror that revealed parts of themselves they had not yet faced. You quietly uncovered emotions they avoided naming. You brought hidden feelings into the light. That is why your presence always felt different from everyone else. That is why your words remained in their thoughts long after conversations ended. That is why your silence continued echoing, even when nothing was being said. That is why your presence stayed long after physical distance increased. And this reveals something even deeper. No one else has affected them in quite the same way since. No new experience has carried the same depth. No other connection has left the same lasting echo. That truth grows clearer with every passing day, and no amount of distance has been able to change it. The intensity was never an accident. It was never created only because of outside circumstances or difficult timing. The intensity existed because the connection itself carried real depth. That depth made everything feel almost forbidden, not because it was wrong, but because it was powerful enough to disturb their inner balance. It reached beyond the emotional limits they had built over the years. It entered places inside them they had never planned to explore. It challenged the way they understood themselves and the way they believed they could manage their emotions. That is why they pulled away. That is why they created distance. That is why they tried to contain something that felt much bigger than they were prepared to hold. Now, during quiet moments of reflection, they carry emotions that are no longer easy to hide. These emotions are not loud. They are not chaotic. They are not dramatic. They move more quietly than that. They are constant. They are steady. They remain beneath thoughts, beneath logic, beneath every distraction, becoming a silent awareness that refuses to disappear. This is not desperation. This is not obsession. This is not an overwhelming need. It is something much quieter and much harder to explain. A silent emotional weight that follows them without asking for attention. Stay with this, because what those feelings slowly become is something they never expected. Inside that emotional space, different feelings begin rising one after another. There is a quiet sense of regret that never shouts but never leaves. There is curiosity that becomes stronger as time moves forward. There are questions that never seem to find complete answers. There is also guilt. Guilt for stepping away without offering an explanation. Guilt for leaving silence where honesty could have existed. Guilt for failing to acknowledge what they truly felt while the moment was still alive. Alongside that guilt comes growing curiosity about you. They wonder who you have become. They wonder how much you have changed. They wonder how your life has continued moving forward without them standing beside you. Beneath every one of those thoughts lives another feeling: fear. Fear that the moment you once shared may never return. Fear that the words left unsaid may remain unspoken forever. Fear that time may have carried both of you beyond the point where everything could have been different. Yet even inside all that uncertainty, another feeling quietly survives. Hope. Gentle, fragile, sometimes unsteady, yet still alive. The hope that not everything has been lost. The hope that distance has not completely erased the connection. The hope that some part of what once existed still remains beneath the silence. Keep watching, because this quiet hope slowly begins changing the way they see everything. Above every other feeling, one emotion begins standing taller than the rest: respect. Deep respect. a kind of recognition they did not fully possess before, but now can no longer ignore. They begin noticing your consistency. They begin seeing your patience with new eyes. They begin recognizing the quiet dignity you carried through silence. They notice that you did not chase them. You did not force answers. You did not allow distance to turn into bitterness. Instead, you stayed grounded. You remained emotionally steady. You refused to lose yourself through reaction. You protected your peace, even when clarity never arrived. That quiet strength leaves a lasting mark. It becomes a memory that stays even after many smaller memories begin fading away. Slowly, they realize something they once failed to understand. What they experienced with you was never ordinary. It was never casual. It was never shallow.